At the beginning of February 1944, the U.S. Navy launched Operation Flintlock, an offensive to take the Marshall Islands archipelago. Surprised by the relatively easy and quick victory at Kwajalein and Majuro Atolls, Admiral Chester Nimitz, the commander of the U.S. Navy's Pacific Fleet, found himself in a position to decide whether to continue with further operations in the Marshall Islands, and to proceed with an attack on Eniwetok Atoll, or to follow the initial plans. According to the original timetable, the landing on Eniwetok Atoll, located on the northwest corner of the Marshall Archipelago, was planned for March or April 1944. For this task, the Navy wanted to assign the 27th Infantry Division, or the 3rd Marine Division, depending on availability. On February 2, when it became apparent that Kwajalein would be secured soon, Admiral Nimitz realized that Expeditionary Force Reserve would remain unused. On the same day, Nimitz ordered the reserve force, under the command of Brigadier General Thomas Watson, formed of the separate 22nd Marine Regiment, and the 2 battalions of the 106th Infantry Regiment, borrowed from the 27th Infantry Division, to be released from the Kwajalein area, and start the preparations for the assault on Eniwetok. Encouraged with ease of carrying the Operation Flintlock so far, the Navy prepared an impromptu plan for taking Eniwetok Atoll, codenamed Operation Catchpole. Since the initial reconnaissance reports indicated only light resistance on the islands within the atoll, the planners did not want to waste any time. Because of that, Operation Catchpole was to begin as soon as possible. The 3 largest islands in Eniwetok Atoll were set as the targets of amphibious assault. Njebe on the north of the lagoon, Eniwetok, and Parry on the south. The plan contained a great deal of improvisation, since there was no proper reserve for the attacking force. For that reason, it is decided to attack islands, one by one, with at least 1 battalion held in reserve. The bold operation was to begin on February 12, 1944. Eventually, it was postponed to February 17. The plan of the operation was straightforward. The invasion fleet was to enter the lagoon, and attack the islands from the lagoon side. As on Kwajalein, the attack would move in phases. In the first phase, the Amphibious Reconnaissance Company would take the islets southeast of Njebe, to emplace the 75mm howitzers of the 2nd Separate Artillery Battalion, and 105mm howitzers of the 104th Field Artillery Battalion. While at the same time, the 4th Marine Division Scout Company would take islets on the west, to prevent any escape attempt of the enemy from Njebe. In the second phase, the 22nd Marine would land from the west, on the lagoon shore of Njebe. The 2nd Battalion would land on the beach, designated as Blue 3, and the 1st Battalion would land on White 1 beach, while the 3rd Battalion and 2nd Separate Tank Company were to remain in reserve. Phase 2 was to commence on February 18. Eniwetok and Parry Islands in the southern sector of the atoll were the targets of Phase 3. The 2 battalions of the 106th Infantry Regiment, supported with tanks of the 2nd Separate Tank Company, would land on Eniwetok Island, from the north, on Yellow 1 and Yellow 2 beach. Meanwhile, the 2nd and 1st Battalion of the 22nd Marine would be moved from Njebe to attack Parry Island on the same day as Eniwetok. The landing beaches on Parry were on the western side of the island, designated as Green 2 and Green 3. The 3rd Battalion, the 22nd Marine, was to remain in close reserve. The exact date of Phase 3 depended upon the progress of the attack on Njebe. However, the planners had one more thing to consider. Eniwetok Atoll was well within the range of Japanese planes, located on the bases at Truk Island. Heavily fortified Truk Island was the main Japanese base in the Central Pacific, and the anchorage of the 4th Imperial Japanese Navy Fleet, with more than 350 planes, situated on 3 airfields. To neutralize this threat, the 9 carriers of the Fast Carrier Force, with more than 500 planes, was to carry out air raids against Truk, in a separate operation codenamed Hailstone. According to intelligence estimates, about 700 Japanese troops were garrisoned on the islands of Eniwetok Atoll, concentrated mostly on Njebe, the only island with an airfield. In reality, the Japanese garrison on Eniwetok Atoll was much stronger. Altogether, there were some 3,500 Japanese on Eniwetok, mainly from the 1st Amphibious Brigade, under Major General Yoshimi Nishida, arrived on Eniwetok in January 1944. In addition to the men of the 1st Amphibious Brigade, several hundred untrained soldiers have been stranded there, mostly civilians, air personnel and sailors. Experiences from previous battles have shown that Japanese soldiers, regardless of their training, are remarkably brave and ready to fight until the very end. Parry Island was the headquarters of Major General Nishida, with island garrison totaling 1,115 troops, and with almost 250 other personnel. On neighboring Eniwetok Island, there were 779 Japanese combat troops stationed there. On Njebe, at the northern tip of the atoll, the garrison consisted of about 692 members of the 1st Amphibious Brigade, plus 54 naval personnel of the 61st Guard Force Detachment, and an additional 500 non-combat personnel. In the early morning of February 17, 1944, naval gunfire from 3 battleships, 3 cruisers and 15 destroyers, marked the beginning of the Operation Catchpole. At the daybreak, planes from 4 escort carriers joined the attack. As the warships entered the lagoon, shelling 3 main targets, men of the Amphibious Reconnaissance Company began boarding the Amtraks for landing on the islets near Njebe. The first troops of Amphibious Reconnaissance Company landed on the islets southeast of Njebe at 1:30 p.m., finding islets unoccupied. At the same time, the men of the Scout Company secured the islets on the west. In the afternoon, howitzers of the 2nd Separate Artillery Battalion took their position on the islets. Soon the artillery was ready for action. In the morning on the same day, February 17, the planes of the Fast Carrier Force launched their first fighter sweep of 70 planes over Truk Island, which attacked aircraft and airfields at dawn. The strike achieved total surprise. U.S. naval pilots destroyed 128 enemy planes, mainly on the ground, losing only 4 planes in the attack. Immediately after the fighter strike, 18 torpedo bombers dropped fragmentary clusters on 3 airfields, making them temporarily unserviceable. The following day, planes attacked shipping in the harbor, destroying 39 ships, mainly auxiliaries and merchants, including a few warships. Operation Hailstone resulted in a complete success. With the loss of only 25 aircraft, the Navy planes destroyed over 200 enemy planes, neutralizing the once fearsome Japanese base at Truk, and making it just another, harmless, isolated atoll. On February 18, after heavy preparatory shelling and bombing, which blew up the ammunition dump on the island, attack on Njebe began. Overcoming initial problems, incurred by waves, wind, and mechanical failures, at 8:45 a.m., the 1st Battalion, the 22nd Marines, landed on White Beach 1, on the right, while the 2nd Battalion landed on Blue Beach 3, on the left. Both battalions landed with 3 companies in line, facing only sporadic resistance at the landing beach. On the left flank, the companies of the 2nd Battalion, supported by the tanks of the 2nd Separate Tank Company, pushed forward rapidly over the open field, bypassing isolated pockets of resistance. Within less than an hour, the 2nd Battalion quickly overran the airfield. The advance was so fast that by 9:25, the troops were so far inland that the scheduled naval gunfire had to be called off. Soon, the western part of the island was clear, except two small pockets, around points designated as Weasel and Newt. By 1:10 p.m., all resistance ceased, in the 2nd Battalion area. Meanwhile, on the right, as the 1st Battalion moved inland, they encountered organized resistance. In an area covered with dense brush and palms, a large number of Japanese put up a stiff fight. To help the 1st Battalion move forward, Brigadier General Watson decided to send one company of the 3rd Battalion, and a tank platoon from the Regimental Reserve. With the help of tanks, the Japanese were slowly forced north, along the island's eastern shore, and eventually pushed into the small area, designated as Skunk Point, on the southeast corner of the island. The Skunk Point was cleared by 3 p.m. The rapid movement across the island left many Japanese bypassed, in their underground shelters, trenches and dugouts. Throughout the day, Marines had to clear the isolated pockets of resistance. When the night fell, the Japanese came out from their shelters, and began attacking the Marines. The attacks were unorganized, but deadly. Finally, on the morning of February 19th, after destroying all remaining enemy positions, the island was in American hands. During the fighting on Njebe, the Marines suffered 85 dead or missing, and 166 wounded. Out of 1,280 Japanese on the island, only 16 surrendered. Although it may seem easy, the fighting on Eniwetok Atoll, and the Marshall Islands in general, was extremely fierce. In the area destroyed by the naval artillery fire, and without a clear front line, many Japanese troops, hidden in the network of spider hole trenches, pillboxes and dugouts, were left behind the advancing Americans. The fighting has turned into a series of ambushes, emplacements clearing, and close quarters combat, against the enemy who would rather die than surrender. This kind of combat left a permanent scar on some of the Marines. Japanese documents, captured on Njebe, indicated that the Japanese garrison is much stronger than the initial intelligence reports suggested. Because of that, Brigadier General Watson considered changing the plan. Instead of attacking Eniwetok and Parry Islands on the same day, he decided to execute the landing on Eniwetok first, and after Eniwetok was secured, to proceed with the landing on Parry. In the early morning of February 19th, the ships with 2 battalions of the 106th Regiment approached Eniwetok Island. Compared with previous islands, Eniwetok received only a fragment of pre-assault bombardment. Since there was no land-based artillery on the adjacent islands, the limited fire support came from only 2 cruisers and 4 destroyers. The 2 Army battalions came ashore from the lagoon side at 9:16 a.m. The 1st Battalion landed on the Yellow 2 beach, and the 3rd Battalion landed on Yellow 1 beach, while the 3rd Battalion of the 22nd Marines and 1 tank platoon of the 2nd Separate Tank Battalion remained at the ships as the floating reserve. The preparatory naval fire had failed to destroy well-concealed positions at the beach, allowing the Japanese to put a fierce resistance, making the landing very difficult. The 3rd Battalion faced heavy resistance on the landing beach. As they pushed inland, they swung left from the Yellow 1 beach, with the task to protect the eastern flank of the bridgehead, until the 1st Battalion cleared the western part of the island for the field artillery emplacements. The landing on the Yellow 2 beach was even more difficult. The men of the 1st Battalion found themselves in an intricate and undamaged network of spider holes, like those the Marines had just encountered on Njebe. By noon, after heavy fighting, the 1st Battalion reached the ocean side of the island. Unknown to Americans, the bulk of the Japanese garrison withdrew to the southwest of Eniwetok Island. Just as the Americans reached the ocean side of the island, the Japanese launched a counterattack. Surprise and accurate Japanese supporting fire allowed an initial penetration into the lines, but the Americans recovered quickly and pushed the Japanese survivors back into the brush. By 12:45, the counterattack had spent its force. After repelling the Japanese counterattack, the Americans resumed the attack west. Although it steadily reduced the Japanese positions, the attacking force was unable to move forward. At 2:25 p.m., the Reserve 3rd Marine Battalion landed at Yellow 2 Beach to help the 1st Army Battalion. Marines took the position in the south, while the Army Battalion regrouped in the north. 1 hour later, both battalions resumed the attack. Marines made good progress, reaching the Japanese defensive positions in the southwest corner of the island by 6:30 p.m. On the right flank, the 1st Battalion encountered stiff Japanese resistance in the pillboxes near Yellow 2 Beach, which caused the delay in the progress. As darkness approached, the order came to continue the assault during the night. The 1st Army Battalion moved steadily through the night, receiving adequate illumination from the ships in the lagoon. While the 3rd Marine Battalion finds it difficult to fight at night, leaving many enemy positions undetected. At 3:30 am, the 1st Army Battalion reached the end of the island, but the Marines failed to destroy the resistance in their sector. The following morning, the Japanese launched one more desperate counterattack against the Marines. The attacks were repelled, and advance on the coast continued. The Marines cleared their sector by 2:45 in the afternoon, on February 21st. Meanwhile, the 3rd Army Battalion advanced steadily northward. At 4:30 am, they had to halt for the night. The attack was renewed on the morning of February 21st. The 3rd Army Battalion reached the northern tip of the island by 4:30 p.m. On Eniwetok Island, the Army and Marine losses were 37 killed or missing, and 94 wounded in action. To complete the Operation Catchpole, only Parry Island remained. By the time of the attack on Parry, the 22nd Marine had already lost 380 men, but still presented a fighting force. To compensate for the losses, Brigadier General Watson gathered all available troops of the Amphibious Reconnaissance Company and 4th Marine Division Scout Company, leaving only small sentry parties on the already taken islands. The preliminary naval and air bombardment of Parry Island opened at dawn on February 22nd. Soon they were joined by field artillery from Eniwetok. Aided by captured maps showing the island's defenses, the bombardment of Parry was more effective than the usual preliminary bombardment. At 9 am, on February 22nd, the Marines stormed ashore. The 1st Battalion landed on Green Beach 3, while the 2nd Battalion hit Green Beach 2. On Green Beach 2, the Marines faced only light resistance. The 2nd Battalion moved inland rapidly, reaching the northern end of the island by 1:30 p.m. At the same time, the 1st Battalion advanced south, where resistance was stronger. To help them in advance at 10 am, the 3rd Battalion landed on Green 2. Both battalions resumed the attack at 1:30 p.m. By now, already experienced Marines knew exactly how to deal with scattered Japanese defense. Using the tanks, flamethrowers, mortars and demolition charges with ease, they cleared enemy emplacements. Moving carefully, by 7:30 p.m., on February 22nd, the men of the 22nd Marine reached the southern tip of Parry Island. As usual, the cleaning of bypassed enemy positions continued the following morning. On February 23rd, the resistance on Parry Island ceased. Operation Catchpole was over. On Parry Island, the Marine casualties were 73 dead or missing, and 261 wounded. Only 66 Japanese surrendered, out of the overall 1,300 present on the island. Overall American casualties, suffered during Operation Catchpole, were 313 Marines and soldiers killed in action, and 879 more wounded. Japanese losses were calculated at 3,380 killed, and 105 captured. The 22nd Marine Regiment soon became the backbone of the new 6th Marine Division, and would fight again in Guam and Okinawa. The 106th Infantry Regiment would return to its parent 27th Infantry Division, and fight on Saipan and Okinawa. For the rest of the war, the islands of Eniwetok Atoll would serve as bases for the continuing neutralization of the Marshalls and Carolines. Also, the atoll itself became a major fleet anchorage, and served as the launching point for several future invasions.